Good afternoon. Hi, everybody. So great to see all these folks on and logging on. Welcome. I'm Sarah Haight. I'm the Director of 2Gen Practice at Ascend, and I'm delighted to be here with you to kick off our national webinar on public support for the 2Gen approach. We know right now that so many leaders in the field are looking for guidance and insights on what works for families. And you're going to hear more this afternoon about how Ascend, in addition to being a hub for forward-thinking solutions like the 2Gen approach, is focused on equipping leaders with the data and information needed to create family prosperity. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that this month is Native American Heritage Month. The Ascend offices are headquartered at the Institute in Washington, D.C., which is situated on and adjacent to ancestral lands of the Anacostan, Piscataway, Susquehannock, Nanticoke, and Pamunkey peoples. We also recognize the peoples native to our campus in Aspen, Colorado, the Ute peoples, and we know that land acknowledgements are just one way to honor and recognize Indigenous history. We encourage you to visit the website of our colleagues at the Center for Native American Youth, who are sharing resources and tools this month on their work on Indigenous families. In transitioning to our webinar, we're really looking forward to covering quite a bit of insight into 2024 polling results, and participants will be muted throughout the session. There's a Q&A box that you'll see, and you can add questions to that throughout the webinar. We'll have 8 to 10 minutes of questions with our panelists towards the end of the webinar, but we'll also do our best to note and answer any questions that come through the Q&A function. Questions we don't get to, we will aim to address in a follow-up blog with Celinda, Brian, Anne, and Tameka. We are also recording the webinar, and we will be following up with materials about our overall strategy for these findings, including a one-pager of key findings. So we have 4 terrific speakers today, and I'm going to save some time on bios and just briefly note their backgrounds. Celinda Lake, one of the Democratic Party's leading political strategists, is a longtime polling partner of Ascend. She serves as a pollster to the Democratic National Committee and other national party committees, and has worked with dozens of Democratic incumbents and challengers at all levels. We are also joined by Brian Nienaber, who is a vice president at the Tarrance Group, a Republican research and strategy firm where he's taken the lead in the development, fielding, and analysis of research projects for political campaigns and ballot initiatives, as well as lobbying campaigns. We are also very lucky to have Tameka Henry with us. She's a longtime parent advisor at Ascend. She is based in Las Vegas and is the executive director of the Abodo Collective, which focuses on eliminating multi-generational poverty. Earlier this month, Tameka unseated the incumbent and won her race to become a trustee for Clark County School Board, where she will continue her work for children and the adults in their lives. Tameka is going to share insights on how the 2Gen approach has fueled her campaign and her platform. To kick us off, I'm really happy to introduce Ascend's founder and executive director, Anne Mosley. Anne also serves as a vice president at the Aspen Institute and a co-chair of the Aspen Institute Forum on Women and Girls. She has more than 20 years of experience in philanthropy, policy, and practice, and is a nationally recognized leader in bringing those sectors together to build pathways to opportunity for children, women, and families with low incomes. So Anne, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I'm going to go really jump in first with where you left us about coming together across all sectors of society. And I'm just really, it's good to be in community with so many leaders who are coming from across the country. We had we had registrations coming from 44 states as well as Puerto Rico. We have leaders from the kind of anchor community organizations, from philanthropy, from policy, from practice, and also leaders from state, local, and federal government. And so what brings us together for this really intentional conversation is we are really all passionate about intergenerational family economic security, educational success, health, and well-being. And I don't assume I know where anybody is coming from on this conversation that we're going to have here today in terms of political party or how one voted. But I do believe for everybody who's joined this conversation, it is about putting children, parents, and families at the center. And I think any candidate that keeps focusing on that message, like one we'll hear from later, Tameka Henry, it's a smart strategy, it's an ethical strategy, and it's what leadership looks like. So we're here for this part where we're going to, Ascend has been working for more than 12 years in a partnership with bipartisan expert polling. And we've been really honored and delighted to work with both the Tarrance Group and Lake Research Partners, as well as some others, to be looking at the tool of polling, but through a bipartisan analysis. We're not a political organization. We understand the world we operate in. And the part that I just want to highlight as we're going into this conversation, and sometimes the world, there's been some dramatic and seismic shifts. What is some actually strong foundational ground we can stand upon? And so you'll be hearing more in the conversation from our expert pollsters, but you can see the strongly agree line that goes right across the center here, across from November 14th to November 24, of a common element of where we see strong support, which is really about making sure children and families with low incomes are successful in early learning, and that we believe that children from the get-go have that learning and early childhood in combination with investing in parents' economic mobility. We'll hear more about that later. And I realizing polling is but one indicator. And for Ascend and for this community here, I remind us of our strong foundation. Our network that spans this country and is active in all 50 states, Puerto Rico, DC, and growing around the globe, has 597 diverse organizations from all segments of society that are embracing a two-generation approach in the values, 162 fellows, 130 partners. But I share this because the work is grounded in also at the rural, state, and local levels from places as diverse as Ohio, Tennessee, Georgia, Minnesota, Washington, Connecticut. I only share that because we are building on something strong at a time where things might feel confusing, upside down. We know our North Star, we know our track record, and we have trust. And so I want to just briefly hit on a few important context for us to understand. And for our context, this is something like all of you, and I'm especially thinking of a lot of the CEOs of organizations that are on this call. We are having very robust and rigorous conversations here at the Aspen Institute about what do we need to learn from these elections? What do we need to understand so we can be of highest service, highest value in building the future that is going to be best for all? And so when we look at this, a few highlights, I just wanted to note one thing. We have wonderful colleagues here at the Aspen Institute and two voices that were really helpful in our kind of immediate processing was Vivian Schiller, who leads our digital Aspen digital program, and also Charlie Dent, who's a former Republican congressman from the state of Pennsylvania, who runs our congressional program. And when we stood up on the balcony with our CEO, Dan Porterfield, across all of our programs, what we knew to be true was this, in fact, was a safe, secure election with no cyber attacks. The machinery and the plumbing of democracy worked in that level. Yet we are also paying close attention to where the bubbles of information and what are, how and who we can trust going forward is in fact a big concern. We're all well aware of the need for us to listen more deeply and respond to what voters and families and communities really want. One thing I wanted to share here, we know, I'll let the experts talk about the political analysis. One part that I wanted to really raise out, because we know in the world we work, we want to ensure that money is fueling mission, not mission chasing money. And when I step up on the balcony and think about the $15.9 billion that was spent across collective campaign efforts this cycle, historic level, I can't help but think we've got better ways to do our elections and better priorities and places to spend our public resources and goods. Just think that money could have funded 1.6 million children in full-time, full-day quality childcare, 500 million children with free lunches, healthy, 100,000 affordable housing units for families. And so I call that out because in the new year, we'll be laying out a 2-gen investment case report where we've documented more than 500 million dollars that have been released in the public-private sector and philanthropic, focused on how to have our change capital make a bigger difference that really works for children, parents, the adults in their lives and families. So moving on and getting to the good stuff and kind of framing up the conversation we're going to jump into. Obviously, we are very fortunate to have two leading Republican and Democratic pollsters, and Celinda, representing the Democratic side, will kick us off. They're going to really walk us through the data so we can see what was going on with the voters, who showed up, who didn't, what were the insights, where was the support for policies for children and families, how does that continue to track? And you'll see one of the headlines, 73% agree that if we want to ensure children and low-income families are successful, we need to invest in their parents. In addition to both Celinda and Brian, I'm thrilled that we're going to have Tameka Henry provide us some inspiration about what leadership looks like, as she was just elected as she was just elected after her second run to the Clark County School Board. Tameka is not someone who had the easy path there, but yet her story, her vision, and her platform around a 2-generation approach, let alone her own personal story and power, shows the power of leadership, and in fact, how she will be stepping in and unseated the incumbent president of the school board in a large and important county like Clark County and Nevada. So we're going to jump in, but when you think about the headlines here, family matters, and we at Ascend at the Aspen Institute put families at the centers of policy, politics, practice, research, you name it. Family matters, leadership matters, trust matters. So with that, I'm going to give the car keys right over to Celinda. And again, I really want to thank all of you for joining us, because right now, no matter where you sit, there is possibility, even in this time of seismic change.
There we go. Sorry, I couldn't get myself unmuted. Thank you so much. And I'm really delighted to be here and delighted to be working with you all in this ongoing relationship. I want to thank Anne for her amazing and inspirational leadership and innovation. I want to thank Brian for his great partnership in working with this data, and our own team, Alicia Snell, Kate Gormley, Jesse Klein, Izzy, and Jenna, who have all contributed enormously to this analysis. So real quickly, what happened? And we don't have individual vote level data yet. And of course, some of the turnout data was exaggerated because the West Coast was not in. But there was a big turnout issue, and that predicted a lot of the vote. And turnout was at record high in 2020, in part because there was the COVID practice of vote by mail. The counties that Biden won in 2020 all experienced turnout drops, while the counties that Trump won in 2020 all experienced turnout gains. So that getting out the base, and we can talk about the Trump campaign not having a turnout effort, but they had a turnout effort that was very, very effective in their neighborhoods. And we had a situation where, between the economy, other issues, the late start of the campaign, even though there was record and amazing grassroots organizing, there were still a lot of voters who in the end decided, I don't know what's in it for me. I don't understand how I'm going to benefit. And two groups that really saw some decline in participation: counties with African-American residents and counties with the lowest median income. In fact, in every state that we lost by just a couple 100,000 votes, there was over 1 million low-income voters who did not show up to vote. The second thing that really marked the campaign was racial depolarization. If we look at the next slide, and a very, very strong gender gap. There is no question that Trump improved his numbers meaningfully among non-white voters. And it wasn't exclusively among men. The exit polls, and that's what we have right now, very flawed vehicles for looking at demographic groups, but the patterns are pretty clear. And some of these patterns have been in the works for a while in terms of declining vote for the progressives and the Democrats. That is particularly true with Latino men, and it is particularly true with blue collar voters. And there's been a lot of conversation about that. White men and white women both voted for Trump. And there was a gender gap in every single demographic group of 10 points or more. The thing that, the issue that really mattered, and there were a lot of things that mattered, but if we look at the next slide, it's the economy, stupid. If we look at the next slide, the economy dominated people's assessment about what was going on, and economic voters, people that were most worried about the economy, voted 60% for Trump, followed by immigration at 88%. But the economy was really what dominated. People thought that the Democrats were out of touch with the economy. They thought the economy was in bad shape. They were really focused on inflation, rising costs, not jobs. And they thought that the Democrats were weaker on the economy. A woman was weaker on the economy, and Harris was weaker than Trump on the economy. We should, as perspective, remember that the Democrats have never won the presidency when they haven't been even on the economy or higher. We were even in 2020. We were 6 to 8 points behind at the end of the 2024 campaign. The Democrats won the poorest people and the wealthiest people. The middle class went pretty solidly for Trump over Harris by a significant margin. And then finally, and relatedly, incumbency really mattered. And of course, many of you have probably seen the international incumbent chart, where the incumbent party, right or left, conservative, moderate, or liberal, have internationally has lost votes without exception. Biden was unpopular, and with only 107 days, it was very hard to separate Biden from Harris. The Biden campaign, I think, the Biden administration did a fantastic job, but had a hard time communicating and getting credit for it. 70% of the voters thought the country was going in the wrong direction, and 66% of them voted for Trump. Voters overwhelmingly wanted change. 82% of the voters wanted change. And the people that wanted complete and total upheaval got it. Voted 71% for Trump, and the people that wanted substantial change tied in terms of voting for Trump. So incumbents were at a disadvantage, change-oriented candidates were at an advantage, and it wasn't just a change of identity, but a change of economic policy in particular that people wanted. In that context, let's look at where people were, and these results are from a joint survey that we did with the Tarrance Group exit poll on the eve of the election. And as self-absorbed people were, as negative as they were about the economy, as much as they wanted change, one of the change that they have wanted for a very long period of time is they have wanted to make things better for children, which they think will make things better currently and things better in the future. And let us remember that there are only 28% of the voters who have children under 18. So this is a commitment across the nation. And it's so strong, it's virtually a core value. It's not even a policy for people. People believe strongly in the two-generation approach. They're absolutely convinced that if you want to make things better for children in low-income families, have them be successful at learning, you have to have them invest in their parents' economic well-being. A majority of Trump voters and unanimously among Harris voters, they agreed with that statement. Democrats virtually unanimously agreed. 2/3 of independents and a majority of Republicans agreed. So if you're looking for a bipartisan agenda, you've got one in the two-generation approach to poverty and the economy. If we look at the next slide, you can see very strongly that African-American voters and Latino voters, and you'll remember the decline among Latino voters, which has been in the making for a number of cycles now, really, really intense about this two-generational approach to the economy. It's a core value for them. African-American and Latino families, men and women, like the two-generational approach to poverty and economic well-being better than they like the 4th of July, better than they like any other policy, virtually any other policy. Whites 2/3 in favor of this policy as well. If we look at the next slide, you'll see there was strong agreement. And while there is a gender gap, there was enormous support among mothers and fathers and non-parents and parents. In fact, in anything, non-parents are even more committed to this policy than parents. 67% of parents say, yeah, you have to invest in the parents' economic well-being if low-income children are going to be successful in their early learning. But 75% of non-parents agree with that. There is an enormous ability to energize a very, very broad constituency here. If we look at the next chart, the great thing about Aspen and of course about Anne's leadership is that we have a long time series now. We have data for over a decade, and these policies have been consistently, strongly supported by the public for over a decade. You can see here 2/3 to 3/4 of the voters agreeing with this approach, and a solid majority strongly agreeing. There have been a little bump, a little dip in November 2022, but voters right back in November 2024. People are very, very tax sensitive right now. And if we look at the next chart, part of the reason they're tax sensitive is they are very short of money. 50% of voters do not have $500 in savings right now. They believe that costs have been rising way beyond wages. That said, when we ask people, do you support the program? And we expounded on it a little bit, Head Start, early education, quality schools, while the parents are getting education and skills training. And by the way, education, career training, skills training, wildly popular with the public right now. This combo, 84% of the voters favor having this approach to help people get out of poverty. 61% strongly favor. But when we say, even if it raised your taxes, not taxes overall, not taxes on the wealthy, but your taxes, 69% of the voters say they favor it. 55% say they strongly favor it. Let's go look at some other policies and see how people are responding. And I think too, Jen and Ascend have really developed a comprehensive agenda. And frankly, almost all of it is very, very popular. So if we look at the next chart, people like helping children and adults in their lives get out of poverty, investing in early and learning and high quality childcare, ensuring new parents, children, and other families have access to mental and behavioral health services. Behavioral health services are supposed to be wildly unpopular. People don't know they're supposed to dislike these policies. They actually like them. They are confused about what behavioral policies are, and so it's helpful to combine mental and behavioral policies and helping build family stabilities to keep families together and children out of child welfare systems, which is particularly strong with Republicans. All of these policies have all of these goals of policies, these priorities, have 3/4 ranking it as a high priority for the president, the governor, and Congress. People want people involved in this at every level of government, and they're quite strong in their support. The intensity has about 1/3 of the people very strongly, like absolute 10 top priority. The reason the intensity is down a little bit is that people love these goals, but they're not sure how we're going to get there. If we look at the next slide, you can see that there's a combination of a great deal of support for both the goals and the policies, like health services, quality child care, doctors' visits, public-private partnerships. You can see across the board a lot of support here. And you'll notice the Harris voters overwhelmingly, it's not even a discussion in their mind, over 90. They like these policies better than they like their own candidate, even better than they like their own candidate. But the Trump voters were strongly in favor of these policies as well. And they particularly liked helping children and adults get out of poverty, early childhood and quality child care, ensuring new parents, children, and other families have access to mental and behavioral health sciences, and helping build family stability to keep families together and children out of child welfare system, and ensuring that new dads and new moms have access to services in a baby's first year that can foster health and well-being. These policies, you want a bipartisan agenda in Washington, or you want a bipartisan agenda in Lansing or Birmingham, you have it in these policies. We look at the next slide. Again, we have great data over time, and we're comparing here 2016 to 2024. A little bit of a decline as people focus more on themselves, but an increase actually in support for early learning and high quality childcare, in part because people think the childcare system has completely collapsed. So over time, these policies have been very, very strong. And this is not a set of policies that are just good slogans or good TV ads. These are policies that have a great deal of enduring quality for people. The last thing, and then I'll turn it to Brian for additional comment, and many of these thoughts are from him as well. 8 in 10 voters agree that they want policies that work better for families. If we want that, we need different kinds of leaders now making decisions. 80% of voters agree with that, and it's strongly bipartisan. 75, 78, 87 say Trump voters, 87% say different leaders. Harris voters say 73% different leaders. And whites, African Americans, and Latinos believe if we're going to have policies that work better for families, we need different kinds of leaders making this decision. People are prepared to be very responsive to leaders who talk across the aisle about these policies. We also tested if we want government-funded programs, and that's the next slide, that serve families to run effectively and efficiently. We need to trust families and give them flexibility to do what's right for their families. And again, a solid majority of Democrats, independents, and Republicans support this. There is more of a partisan gap, but it's overwhelmingly, again, by 26 points net, supported among Republicans, and by 31 points net, supported by Trump voters. People see this as a remarkably nonpartisan agenda. And finally, in terms of leadership and people's desire for leadership, people agreed very strongly. It's time to start judging parents and start supporting them in ways that truly help families become financially stable. 77% of people agreed with that. 2/3 of Republicans, 3/4 of independents, and virtually every Democrat out there. 2/3 of Trump voters and virtually every Harris voter out there. So we have a strong agenda that remains robust. People understand it at both a policy and a value level, and people want leadership that is responsive to this. On that note, let me turn it over to Brian to add some more flavor to this analysis.
All right, thank you so much, Linda. I really appreciate it. And again, thank you to everybody in the call. Celinda and I often spend much of the fall season on opposite sides of campaigns trying to figure out how to defeat each other. And so it's always nice when we do these post-election polls and kind of have more wholesome, robust policy goals about how we can help other people. So I very much appreciate the opportunity to work on this, and all the years we've worked together on it's been great. I just have a few fundamental points to make. One is, we sort of talked about the issue matrix and we let people pick what were their top 2 votes, what were their top 2 issues of concern about the election. When we look at the whole electorate, it's a pretty diverse group, and there's all kinds of things in there: the economy, immigration, women's rights, democracy, abortion. When we looked at just Republican voters, there's really just kind of two issues really at the top, and that's the economy and immigration. And then the only other issue that's kind of even in the mix is terrorism, national security. So we're really looking, when you look at Republican voters and we deal with Republican elected officials, they're really looking at things from a security mindset of like either does this improve the economic security of myself, my constituents, or does this improve the security of the country by making things, having us less averse to having terrorism or having people who come here illegally to do to mean us harm. I think that kind of shines through in a lot of the data that, we went over kind of all these premise arguments, and they are, we talked about if you want to make sure families with low incomes are successful in early learning, we need to invest in their parents' economic well-being. That's 73% agree overall. It's 57% agree with Republicans. So while there's a majority agreement, it's just not nearly that same level of intensity. And I think we'll see that again and again, that when Republicans, I think the one exception is when Republicans can sort of see, hey, this is something I can see how it's going to improve the economy, or I can see how this is going to improve economic outputs, economic outcomes, then things grow for it. But otherwise, there is a lot of things where, Head Start, we particularly went over, sure, it's 72% favor. When we said, what if it raises your taxes, Republicans dropped to 49% favor. So you see that like 23-point gap when, that sort of, well, is this something that's going to damage the economy? Is this something that's going to damage my personal economic situation? You see this real drop in concern. I think the one thing that really shone through was we did talk about, do we need better, more effective leaders? That one really was one where Republicans, fully 87% of them agreed that this is, we needed better, more effective leaders. And, this was certainly an election where Republicans went in and voted for a challenger candidate for president, and in many states voted for challenger candidates up and down the ballot. So I think not unsurprising to kind of see that. And then, I think when we sort of looked at this policy rankings that Celinda went over, the three things that really came in at kind of 20% plus of tens of what are the things that would really be, absolute top priorities. We're helping family stability by helping family out of welfare systems. So you can sort of see that, okay, we're going to be spending less, we're going to be having a more robust economic growth, encouraging new parents to have mental behavioral services. I think, again, Celinda mentioned, this is one, voters are supposed to think maybe is a little silly, but I think so many voters, this has been a personal touch in their life one way or the other, and they love saying it as a priority. Investing in early learning, high quality childcare. I think it's in a society where so many of us, people are dealing with two people working, two parents are working, two parent households, where both parents are working, they can really see that kind of the economic personal stability that's going to provide by having just better systems in place to make these work. And so, I mean, that's really the fundamental point I would make is I think, there's some excellent, well thought out and well tested public policy here. And I think, and this is certainly a trap we fall into, we've worked it, that you sort of think the merits of the policy will be able to carry the day on this on their own. And I think the big takeaway I want you to have is when you want to talk to kind of build support with Republican stakeholders, Republican office holders, as much as the merits of this would certainly be an enormous net gain for society, I think being able to couch this for a lot of Republican office holders in the face of this is going to help make things better. People are going to be able to go to work. People are going to be less dependent on government assistance. This is going to have a net gain that they're going to have more thoughtful, productive people that are going to, provide economic growth. And this is going to lead to a lot more security on the other side of, people who, have jobs and quality childcare and quality mental health services are much less likely to fall into the trap of ending up on welfare, ending up in sort of crime-ridden situations. So I think it's really a two-step process that certainly when you talk to Democrats and to a lesser extent independents, I think the merits of the policy can carry the day. But when you want to focus on Republican office holders, there really ought to be a thoughtful and intentional focus on, the real economic benefits of these, because that's just where so much of their electorate is. And I think that was kind of all the key points I wanted to make. I'll turn things back over and keep this informative time working.
Brian, thank you so much. And I just want to jump in to encourage folks to put their questions in the Q&A function. We've had a number come in already. We are trying to keep 8 to 10 minutes for live Q&A with Celinda and Brian and Anne and Tameka. But it's my pleasure to introduce Tameka Henry as our final speaker today. As I shared at the top, and Anne did as well, Tameka is a parent advisor to Ascend and a newly elected trustee to the Clark County School Board. Tameka is going to share her insights and thoughts on running a campaign fueled by the two-gen approach and having a platform as she goes into the school board work that focuses on children and families. Tameka?
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Tameka Henry. I am a trustee-elect for the Clark County School District here in Las Vegas. We are the 5th largest school district in the nation, serving nearly 300,000 students. My roots in advocacy began with the Head Start program. So I know that it was mentioned here several times. It's the best two-generation program that I could have ever been involved in with Oscillero Learning. So for me, again, I said it is the 5th largest school district in the nation. And right now we're trending 48th in the nation for educational outcomes for our students. This was one reason why I chose to run. I wanted to make sure that our students and families had representation from our communities that looked like me. Often we're overlooked, and I wanted to make sure that families and community members knew that we had a voice. Also, education is a nonpartisan issue, and it's my focus that every child has access to a high quality education. For me, when I was on the campaign trail, voters were really looking forward, making sure that our district was being held accountable for the outcomes of students, making sure that we honored transparency and the voices from our communities. Also, I wanted to say that it's important for me to make sure that our school district is partnering with those local nonprofit organizations and businesses who can help support families as a whole and move families forward. Because that was often some things that I heard from organizations that they had a hard time getting in to share their programs and services. And so, as of now, incoming decision maker, I want to make sure that I work along with other trustees to ensure that we are closing that gap because families really need that to happen so they can have those stronger outcomes for our students. Also, we want families to have that economic mobility. So I wanted to share my hopes. My hopes are to position our schools as engines for not only our students, but their entire families. We must reduce generational poverty within our families and our communities because when students are coming to school hungry, they're not focused on learning. When students don't have a place to sleep at night, they're not focused on learning. And that's why it's so important that we really partner and collaborate with those businesses and nonprofit organizations who have this focus on families to have that economic mobility. And for that two-gen approach, it's so important that we create those spaces for families to have that leadership, those opportunities for leadership and learning, even alongside their students. I would love to see an increase in two-gen STEM and literacy opportunities. I can remember going to school on Saturdays with my child and learning in her classroom alongside her so I can better help her at home. We need to make sure that we have culturally relevant programming that respects and responds to the diverse needs of all of our families. Also making sure that we offer flexibility in the timing of workshops and meetings, leveraging technology to ensure that families can attend. I have so many notes. I learned a lot through this campaign. I just want to make sure that all families, all students have the opportunities that my family and my students had. All it takes is one person to reach a family, to share data in a way that it is meaningful and that families can have, that data to make informed decisions. Support families by offering them various resources to be their child's first teacher, but also a partner in education. I know I only have a few minutes, but I hope that what I have said resonates with many of you. I know that, for many, the future seems, uncertain and bleak, but we can be those bright spots. We can be the hope that we need. We must collaborate with one another, support all families, and make sure that they have access and opportunity to be their best selves and be their child's strongest advocate. I truly thank you for this opportunity, Sarah, and the Ascend team. And I'm looking forward to, I'm really looking forward to being just a beacon of hope on our school board here locally in Clark County.
Tameka, thank you so much for your leadership and for taking time out of what I know is a super, super busy schedule right now to join us and share some of your reflections and your priorities. So thank you.
You're welcome.
We have about 10 minutes for questions and responses, and I want to get right into some questions that have showed up in the chat. I'm going to start with one from Jen Nandu. And Celinda, I'm going to go to you with this first. Brian, welcome your feedback, and then Anne can respond as well. Jen is asking, is there anything data-wise that you've seen about the part of the electorate that did not vote? So the folks who decided not to vote or couldn't vote, and what may have kept them home on 2-gen issues. So I think Celinda and Brian answering that part of the question, and then Anne thinking about how we're applying what we know now about that to our strategy, especially as we think about civic engagement and advocacy on these issues.
So really, really good question. We have not looked at the non-voters and on the 2-gen issues for the 2024 elections, but we have looked at the similar demographic groups. They were younger, they were people of color, they were lower income. All of those folks are really, really strong on 2-gen. They were also very hard hit economically and felt there was no difference between the two parties. They thought there was a real failure of leadership, a pox on both your houses. We're not going to bail you out again without you having produced more. You're out of touch with my life. So as you hear that description, economically oriented people who are looking for things that are change that makes real difference in their lives, you know they're going to be wildly, wildly in favor of the 2-gen approach.
Brian, any thoughts on that before we go to Anne?
I think, I mean, this is just one of the real frustrating things. I think you'll talk to anybody that I think, campaigns up and down the ballot spend so much time and effort trying to turn people out, and we just ended up with fewer voters. And, sometimes you can just put all the best inputs you can, and you can't, you can lay out the best trail you can in the ballot box, but you can't make people walk it unless they want to.
Jen, I love this question. And so it's sort of building off of both what Celinda and Brian just said. I think there's a huge opportunity for like those of us in the social sector to commit to a very clear, purposeful 5-year agenda,
Hmm.
2025 to 2030. The next 2 years are going to be dramatic. And we will also be looking a lot at moving at local and state levels where there is a positive, pragmatic, practical set of policies and systems change innovations that get to the heart of the economic pathways, educational success and well-being for families. Connecting that, and this is something Ascend is prioritizing, especially for the local and state level, because that's where policies get implemented, budget decisions have impact. And there's also room for a new model of community, public-private partnership, and also families and communities holding leadership accountable. I shared that because one of the innovations I think we've seen little glimmers of, but it needs to be a robust strategy, is ensuring any key touch point where families work, pray, play, learn should be a civic on-ramp.
Hmm.
A civic on-ramp. And this is something, even when we think about the human services kind of anchor institution where it is a support, but it's only one. It can happen in a faith community or in sort of a human services department. There is no reason why anyone cannot sign up to vote and to participate. And that needs to become of our DNA, just like when we talk about economic, health, education, for example. Second, we really need new leadership. And this leadership piece, Tameka is but one example. And I think this is, I am not sort of a big sort of, I get upset with with both political parties, candidly, because I think they're missing the point. When we think about where leadership is, because leadership lies in everyone, in all parts and all people from all corners of our community. And if we don't tap the full brilliance and imagination and tenacity and the political, and looking at whether for the Democratic Party, I'll say, because that was a turnout, you look for leaders that inspire, reflect the communities that they serve. And I'm just saying it's Ascend Fellows, but if you look at leaders and parent advisors, Governor Wes Moore, Senator Raphael Warnock, Mayor Melvin Carter, you have leaders who love and live in community and take that into their policy. And I think that's an opportunity that we need to think. And the last part is, so when we think about that leadership lever, why 5 years? These 2 years are going to be bumpy. So we got to buckle up, stay focused on what we can move and build at state and local levels and raise that up. I also think it's a chance we have just around the corner. We will have 36 governors up for election, as well as this is bigger than even politics. And so, Jen, I really think the opportunity to really weave in civic and leadership throughout the policies and practice work, but also for philanthropy to lead on giving some anchor investments that are saying, no, this is not project work. This is about building the future of our country and starting and grounding it in families. And 5 years is basically, there's no way we have to fund, we want all of us to win and have the results. So thank you.
Thanks, Anne. We've had a number of questions actually come in directly to Ascend about the implications for the election and what we learned around racial equity and structural disparities. And Susan Gale Perry, an Ascend Fellow, asks, has some curiosity about the interplay between identity politics and the degree of support for 2Gen. So Celinda, to what extent does the data give us insight into the relative strength of support for 2Gen strategies for a better economy versus opinions about who feels they have been left out of the progressive identity politics narrative? Wondering if you can respond to that.
We haven't really looked at it from that perspective. It's a really, really thoughtful and interesting question. But I guess I would say that the 2Gen approach, what we've seen over the decade we've been doing research, is that every way we've expressed a problem, people have thought this was part of the solution. So there was the time when we were really concentrating on the fact that people for the first time thought their kids would not be better off than themselves. They loved the two generation. There was the time when people were kind of, cut on what they perceived to be welfare programs, and they were tighten your belt and all that. People thought this is an investment that returns 2 and 3/4, 3 times. It's not just spending. This will produce, this will get back in the economy. We now have a period, as Brian said, where people are really focused on the economy and they think this is a real economic engine. So what's really interesting to me, there was a time when people wanted healthcare reform and they thought, yeah, the 2 generation approach is where it's at. You should give healthcare to the kids and the parents. Like, you should screen them both simultaneously. So what's really been amazing to me over the years is the degree to which people think this is a great solution for whatever problem they're focused on. It's really more of an asset model than a deficit model kind of program, honestly.
Thanks, Celinda. I want to get to one more question because I think it's actually very encompassing of others that are coming through and representative of what the field is thinking about. And that's from Marcia Edwards. It's state-based. She's in Tennessee, where there's a super majority. And in her conversations with Republicans, she's focused on the impact of economic policies on the high population of Tennessee families living at the extreme poverty level. So 2 times federal poverty level. With conservatives more empowered, as she puts it, should her conversation with them shift in content or priority? And Brian, I don't know if you have thoughts on that, going to Celinda, and then Anne will have you close.
Sure. I mean, I do, this is the perfect example. I think kind of the fundamental point I wanted to make is, like, in a legislature like Tennessee, where it's a lot of conservatives, a lot of social conservatives, a lot of people who might not, immediately see the appeal of the 2G approach because it's just generally good public policy. I think leading with saying this is good policy, it's also good politics, because these people who get this assistance are going to become more economically productive members of society. Their children are less likely to grow up and become, go into crime, or they're much more likely to go into becoming a better member of society. These are going to save you in the long run, because every kid that you get who goes to college and doesn't end up, goes to college or trade school and doesn't end up, the kid's markedly less likely to go on welfare or things like that. I would certainly, when I'm there, lead with those type of things when I meet with those type of legislators, because that's the lens they're going to be viewing this for. Does this make the state better economically? And does this kind of not offend the kind of anti-woke sensibilities that my social conservative wing of the party in the legislature has? And I think if you can lead with those 2 things, you're going to be in a much better place than just coming in and kind of slamming our research down and saying, well, this is clearly a solution and most people like it and you should get behind it too. I think when you kind of sell them on, this is why it's particularly good politics that you can feel good about getting your constituents up about, you're going to have a much more welcome reception.
I'm going to turn it over to Anne to close us out. I just want to note 2 things. One, we have recorded the webinar and we will be sharing some next steps, including some guidance on this content, a 1-pager. And we will also be taking the questions that we were not able to answer, organizing them with responses from Celinda, Brian, and Anne, and sending that back out to folks, because we are mindful that there's some really good questions that we haven't gotten to. Anne?
Thank you so much, Sarah, and to the Ascend team who kind of all work behind the scenes on this. And Tameka, we look forward to partnering with your leadership in the great state of Nevada. And, as Sarah said, I'm thanking in advance Brian and Celinda for kind of the continued kind of analysis and partnership, and because the questions in that chat were super thoughtful and are super important. And so we'll circle back. And I think, kind of wrapping this up, this is not a sprint. But this is about being ready for the new year. And so, ultimately the leadership required to achieve this vision, about truly the American dream being an American reality, which we are not anywhere near that, but to getting to a place of intergenerational economic well-being and security and educational success it's not about each of us as individuals. It's about a movement of values-driven, family-centered leaders, family-centered serving organizations, and mission-driven leaders on the levers of change working collectively. And so I don't know if Lorelei Vargas is still on here, because I do think we're going to see some very interesting economic reverberations that can translate into some tough fiscal times. But regardless, how we are focusing resources, taking and assets from community, private sector, public sector, and philanthropy, but doing that in the way that thinks about human capital, the intellectual capital, and the solutions that we know that are out there that work, and packaged into a proactive policy and systems change agenda that can roll across all 50 states and beyond, packaging up that roadmap with network partners and fellows who are on the tip of those solutions. Let's get the roadmap and the blueprint that's positive, it's pragmatic, it's implementable, we can be accountable to, and the leadership that will drive it. And it's time for us to go on the road trip, the great American Ascend Aspen road trip. We're truly getting out into the community, bringing the leaders together, putting what families want, need, and deserve at the center with families. I look forward to every governor, every mayor, every school board, every foundation CEO, every community anchor organization, and families from across all backgrounds coming together. Because literally, we're a pluralistic society, we're a pluralistic country. We just haven't quite figured it out yet, but this is one pathway. And I know the movement and the community that Ascend has out there in the world actually has a chance to set a new agenda that will actually be the kind of the future proof for us all. So again, thank you all so much. We will have follow-up series on these conversations going deeper on this kind of data, but we're also going to be looking at what we're learning on about the future of leadership. There's a little bit of polling we've done on that, as well as some partners to say, what kind of leadership? What does it look like? What do people want, as well as the trust? So in closing, we know that change happens at the pace of relationship. And also we need to make governance and power. We need to build that, share that, and really transform it and use it for the right reasons. Thanks, everybody.